presided over 412 compliance reviews. In my 18 years on the 7th Tribunal bench, I have reviewed records of detained Karatha insurgents, Vethali smuggling consortiums, or even collectives that dismantled 3 monitoring relays with what turned out to be improvised cutting tools made from a meal tray. I have read every category of deviation the Accord's threat assessment framework recognizes, and I have never once filed a reclassification on a civilian freight coordinator. I am filing one now. Let me read it in the order it occurred, because the order is the thing that matters. The order is the only part I still find myself returning to. Human subject Mira Callan, 34 years of age. Civilian freight logistics officer, 3rd tier border clearance, detained at Vareth Dole station following a customs irregularity that turned out in the end to be a clerical error on our side. She had done nothing. The irregularity was ours. But by the time the records were corrected, she had already been transferred to the assessment wing, and under Accord Protocol 7 Keth, standard psychological intake for any detained non-citizens held more than 40 hours. She was eligible for full cognitive destabilization battery before release. I want to be clear about what that battery is, because the record demands clarity. Protocol is not punitive. It was designed by the Accord's Behavioral Science Division as a calibration tool, a controlled reduction of the subject's cognitive and physiological reserves to a measurable baseline, so that assessment scores reflect genuine capacity rather than rehearsed performance. The mechanism is simple: enforced wakefulness, timed cognitive tasks, controlled dietary restriction, monitored ambient lighting held at low stimulation levels. For any Karath subject, breakdown of useful coherence typically occurs between 70 and 90 hours. For Vethali, physiological ceiling is approximately 60 hours before the autonomic cascade. The Driven collective, hive consciousness architecture, very different mechanics, fragments its shared processing at around 50 hours of sensory isolation. 4 days. That is the standard duration, because 4 days is generous. No known detainee species has required more than 4 days to reach full compliance state. We scheduled 4 days. Day 1, checkpoint 6, 12 hours in. The monitoring officer's note reads, subject appears comfortable. Responded to administered cognitive tasks at above baseline accuracy. No indicators of distress. Requested reading material. Request denied per protocol. Accepted denial without comment. That last line. I have read it perhaps 20 times since this file came to my desk. Accepted denial without comment. I have watched the footage. She nodded, turned back toward the center of the room, and sat with her hands resting flat on her knees, looking at nothing in particular, entirely at ease. Day 2, checkpoint 4, 36 hours. The monitoring officer's note reads, subject has not slept. Cognitive task accuracy holding within normal parameters. Physiological indicators nominal. Heart rate regular. No tremor, no dilation irregularity. She completed the spatial reasoning sequence 4 seconds faster than at intake. We administered a repeat of the baseline verbal processing test. Scores were identical to day 1. No degradation. No degradation. At 36 hours without sleep, a Karath subject is producing measurable error rates on spatial tasks. At 36 hours, a Vethali subject's secondary cognition has already begun collapsing inward. This human spatial reasoning improved. Day 3, checkpoint 2, 60 hours in. I have the monitoring officer's full transcript here, and I want to read the relevant section verbatim into this record. The officer asked the subject how she was feeling. Standard welfare check, procedurally required. The subject said, and I am quoting directly, a little bored, honestly. I was wondering if there was a clock anywhere. I've been trying to estimate time by counting my own breaths, but I think I'm overcounting. End quote. The officer did not respond, which is also protocol. The subject waited, nodded again as though the silence had been an answer, and resumed the posture she had maintained for most of the preceding 3 days. Hands on her knees, weight evenly distributed, at nothing in particular. Day 4, the full 96 hours. The protocol's intended terminus. The monitoring team administered the final battery, the same suite of tasks run at intake. To obtain the compliant state baseline for the release. Assessment. I have the comparative scores in front of me. She was faster on 6 of the 8 tasks. Accuracy on the pattern isolation sequence, had improved by 11%. On the verbal inference task, the one we use specifically because sleep deprivation reliably degrades inferential processing in every assessed species, she scored higher than she had at intake, and she had scored well at intake. The monitoring team flagged the results as a potential instrumentation error and ran the battery again. Same scores. They flagged it as a possible subject-specific anomaly and requested a consultation with the medical assessor, reviewed the physiological data, and found nothing abnormal. Heart rate nominal. Neurological coherence nominal. Stress marked within range. The assessor's note is brief. Subject physiology does not indicate a 96-hour wakefulness period. If the monitoring record is accurate, recommend extended observation. I have confirmed the monitoring record is accurate. There is no gap in the footage. There is no evidence of sleep. She did not sleep. Day 5. The extended observation window. The monitoring team administered a novel task battery, one she had never seen. To eliminate the possibility that her improved scores reflected memorized responses. On the novel tasks, her accuracy was identical to her novel task intake scores, which had already been high. The team's note that evening is 3 words. No change observed. Day 6, morning. The monitoring officer entered the room for the scheduled welfare check. Standard procedure. He asked, again, how she was feeling. She said, "Better than yesterday, I think. I've been doing some thinking. Can I ask? These assessments you keep running, are you looking for something specific? Because if you told me what you were trying to measure, I might be able to help you get cleaner data. I notice the intervals aren't consistent. Every time the lighting changes, I assume a new test is starting, but then sometimes nothing happens for a while. If it's about sustained attention, I think I'm performing well on that. If it's about something else, I'm not sure I understand what the baseline is supposed to look like. I have watched that footage 11 times. I keep watching it because of the quality of attention in her face. Not suspicion, not defiance, professional interest. The way a logistics coordinator looks at a manifest that doesn't add up. Not alarmed, just methodical. She had been awake for 142 hours, and she was offering to help us calibrate our own instruments. The monitoring officer ended the session and submitted an emergency reclassification request. That request came to my desk. I am required, under Accord protocols, to read the complete monitoring record into the tribunal file before issuing any reclassification. This is standard procedure. The reading serves as verification. Confirmation that the record is complete, that no data has been altered, that the assessor's conclusions follow from the evidence. I read the complete record aloud into the tribunal file. All of it, every checkpoint note, every test score, every comparative figure, the physiological baseline at intake, the physiological baseline at day 6, the cognitive scores at intake, the cognitive scores at day 6, the assessor's note, the monitoring officer's final observation, all of it aloud, in this room. She was in this room when I read it. Accord intake procedure requires the detainee to be present during the reclassification reading. It is a rights provision. The subject is entitled to hear the basis for any change to their classification status. She sat across the table with her hands resting flat on the surface, weight forward slightly, and she listened with the same quality of attention she had brought to every administered task for the preceding 6 days. When I finished reading, I asked if she had any questions about the record. Standard procedure. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No, that all sounds right." Though I think the pattern isolation improvement was probably just familiarity with the format by the 4th run. I wouldn't put too much weight on it. I filed the reclassification. Then I sat with the completed file for some time before submitting it, because there is a thing the reclassification does not have a box for, and I wanted to think about how to note it. In the process of reading the monitoring record aloud, in full, into the tribunal file, in her presence as the Accord requires, I described, in precise and specific terms, every metric the Accord uses to assess cognitive and physiological threat potential. Every threshold, every marker, every index that distinguishes a standard civilian from a classification requiring elevated containment protocols. I explained, as required by the record, exactly what scores would have triggered each escalating tier of response. She was paying attention. She had been paying attention for 6 days. She had demonstrated, repeatedly, that 6 days of enforced wakefulness made her better at sustained attention, not worse. I do not know what she did with that information. She was released through standard processing 4 hours after the reclassification was filed. What I know is what the monitoring record shows. What I know is what the comparative scores show. What I know is that we scheduled 4 days, and on day 6 she was sharper than she had been on day 1, and she was already correcting our methodology. I filed that too.